They were supposed to check out a simple noise complaint. At least, that's what Officer Ryan Keller kept telling himself as he steered past the black cast-iron gates of Maple Glen Children's Home, a quiet orphanage tucked away on the edge of Columbus, Ohio. The place looked almost two perfect rows of scarlet maples, a driveway swept clean, white shutters framing an old colonial house like a scene torn from a storybook. It wasn't the kind of place where you'd expect shadows to hide, but Titan thought differently. The instant Keller stepped out of his cruiser, his partner, a towering German shepherd, trained for every nightmare a cop could imagine, hit the ground running. Titan froze, ears sharpened, nose cutting through the cool autumn air like a blade. Then, without warning, he lunged into a full sprint. His bark ripped through the stillness, raw and urgent, as though he were trying to tear the truth straight out of the brick walls. "Titan, heel!" Keller's command shattered against the dog's defiance. That was the first alarm. Titan never disobeyed, not once in 2 years. By the time Keller rounded the building, Titan was clawing at an unremarkable stretch of siding behind the orphanage. It wasn't a door. It wasn't anything, just a plain beige wall tucked between rusted pipes and dented garbage bins. But Titan's body trembled with fury, a guttural growl pouring from his chest like a warning bell. Keller crouched, his pulse hammering, and that's when he saw it. A seam, a hairline fracture across the panel, nearly invisible to the naked eye. A door pretending not to exist. "Officer, everything all right back there?" The voice snapped him around. A woman in a navy sweater and volunteer badge stepped into view. Nancy Whitmore, head of staff. Her smile stretched thin. "Sorry about the noise," Keller replied, tugging Titan back. "Dog picked up something. Routine check." Nancy laughed, too lightly. "He's got a sharp nose. Probably smelled one of the kids sneaking food. Happens all the time." Keller glanced once more at the seam, Titan still straining against the leash, growling like the world depended on it. "Right. Just logging it and moving on." She nodded, lips tight. "Of course. Let me know if you'd like a tour." Back in the cruiser, Titan pressed his massive head against the glass, eyes locked on the orphanage. He didn't blink once on the ride back. Keller tried to shake it off. He couldn't. That night, reviewing his body cam, Keller paused the footage on the seam. It wasn't sloppy construction. It was intentional, hidden. His stomach sank. Then came the ping. An email from nowhere, no traceable address. "You were right to trust your dog. Go back. They're not safe." Keller sat frozen, the glow of the screen painting the worry on his face. His instinct screamed louder than protocol. The next morning, he filed the report as inconclusive, procedure satisfied. But in the pit of his chest, something darker had already taken root. Because as he closed the file, a second email slid in. No subject, no sender, just a single attachment. Keller hesitated before opening it. Inside was a photo, grainy, taken in the basement of Maple Glen, and in the corner, half hidden by shadow, was Titan, staring straight at the camera. Licensed, state-funded, run by a church-affiliated nonprofit. But something didn't sit right. When he ran a deeper check, he discovered that the facility had changed ownership 3 times in 5 years. Each new nonprofit had a nearly identical board of directors with shuffled names and P.O. boxes instead of real addresses. Red flag number 2. Then he looked into former employees and found one that stood out. Grace Manning, age 28, former social worker, quit. Suddenly, 2 months ago. No forwarding address, no LinkedIn activity. Her last posted photo online was a group shot of her with a young girl, a pale brunette, with frightened eyes named Lily. Keller knew that face. She had stared at him through the window when Titan barked, unblinking, expressionless. He tried to contact Grace. Every number was dead. Every email bounced, but there was a P.O. box listed in her resignation letter. Keller wrote one line on a blank card and mailed it. "Are the children still there?" 3 days later, he received a manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a USB stick and a post-it with one word: hurry. If stories like this move you and you believe in the heroic bond between officers and their kinds, don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals. We share real emotional and powerful stories of animal bravery and second chances. He plugged the USB into his laptop with a sinking feeling in his gut. The footage was grainy, black and white, hidden camera style. It showed a dark hallway, concrete walls, low light, no windows. The angle was tilted like it was taped to the inside of a vent. A shadowy figure led 5 young girls' ages, 6 to 10, single file through what looked like a false panel in a wall. The camera timestamp was from 8 days ago. The last girl in the line was Lily, the final. The clip was only 5 seconds long. A hand reaching for the camera, a low whisper, "She knows." Then static. Keller leaned back in his chair, his throat tightened. He looked at Titan sleeping by the door and whispered, "You were right, buddy." By noon, Keller had looped in 2 other officers and quietly requested a re-entry into Maple Glen under a fire safety inspection pretext. He needed to see what was behind that wall, but this time, he was going in quiet. No patrol car, no uniform, just him, Titan, and a flashlight. When he arrived, Nancy Whitmore greeted him at the front with that same too-sweet smile. "Back so soon?" "Just a routine fire code sweep," Keller said. "State regulations." "Of course," she said, stepping aside. "Anything to keep the kids safe." Titan pulled hard on the leash the moment they rounded the back corner. Same wall, same growl. Only this time, the scratch marks from his last visit were gone. Fresh paint. That was red flag number 3. Keller crouched beside Titan and ran his gloved hand along the siding. He tapped lightly, listening. Hollow. He turned to the maintenance worker, tagging along. "Got a crowbar?" The man hesitated. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." One pry, then another. The false panel gave way with a creak, revealing a narrow stairwell heading down into darkness. Titan didn't wait for permission. He charged forward, tail high, ears alert, his paws thumping down the stairs 2 at a time. Keller followed with his flashlight sweeping side to side. The air turned damp, the walls narrowed. At the bottom, he found a door, steel, unmarked, no handle on the outside, but inside, the room was silence, and then a faint scraping sound. Keller raised his light. In the far corner of the cement room sat 5 sets of children's clothing, neatly folded on metal trays. Each tray had a number written in permanent marker. Beside them, 5 school backpacks, all unzipped, empty, soundproof, foam-lined. The walls. A ceiling-mounted camera had been ripped out. On the floor sat a discarded pink headband with tiny, glitter stars. Keller picked it up. The name Lily was written inside in Sharpie. There were no children here now, but they had been here recently. He knelt beside Titan and whispered, "Find them." Titan sniffed, growled, then turned sharply toward a second wall. Keller's heart pounded. He stood, flashlight, trembling in his hand. Behind that wall, what was still hidden? The silence in the hidden basement room wasn't just eerie, it was offensive. To Officer Ryan Keller, it screamed of injustice, of something rotten that had been operating right under the city's nose. He stood in the soundproof chamber, the walls, suffocatingly close, while Titan continued pacing along the opposite wall, nose twitching with unease. Something was still off. The children were gone, but the air still carried a trace of them. That mix of sweat, baby, powder, and fear that Titan never mistook. Keller turned on his radio. "Dispatch, this is Keller. I need a crime scene unit and 2 detectives at Maple Glen Orphanage. We've uncovered an unauthorized basement structure. Potential trafficking site. Secure the perimeter." "Copy that, Keller," the voice on the other end responded. ETA 10 minutes. As Titan scratched at another spot on the far wall, Keller walked over and noticed something odd. A patch of cement darker than the rest. Recently applied, still slightly damp. Keller tapped it with his knuckles. Hollow again. There was more. He didn't have time to break it open before the backup arrived, but he marked the spot with yellow chalk and left a flag for forensics. Titan stood beside him, tense, as a coiled spring, tail stiff, breath quick. "You're not letting this go, huh?" Keller muttered, patting his partner's back. "Neither am I." By the time the forensics team descended into the hidden room, Keller was already upstairs reviewing the building's emergency exit blueprint with Nancy Whitmore, the head of staff. "We've never used that space," Nancy insisted, her tone defensive now. "It must be from an old blueprint, maybe from before we renovated." Keller watched her hands. They were trembling. "You said earlier that one of the girls, Lily, I think her name was transferred recently." Nancy hesitated. "Yeah, her and a few others. Transferred where?" "To our sister facility in Indiana." "Can I see the paperwork?" Her throat bobbed. "I'm not sure if it's been filed yet. You'd have to ask our administrator. He's not in today." Keller stared at her. "Then I'll wait." Nancy offered a forced smile, but her eyes gave her away. She was lying. While the forensics team documented the hidden basement, Keller sat in his cruiser, scrolling through every online trace of Grace Manning, The former social worker who had sent him the USB. Still, no phone number, no email. But one thread caught his attention, an old foster care support forum. Buried in a thread about burnout was a post from a username, GhostGrace89. The writing style was cautious but familiar. The last post read, "You think you're doing good work until you realize they're not all getting adopted. Some disappear quietly, some cry at night, and no one checks. I left before I became a part of it." The post was 5 weeks old. The IP address was masked, but Keller recognized the tone. He opened a private forum account and wrote back, "If this is Grace, it's Keller. You were right. I found the room. They're missing. I need your help." He didn't expect a reply, but 10 minutes later, it came. "I'll talk. Not on here. P. Box 303, Powell, Ohio. Tuesday, noon, alone." 3 days passed. Keller showed up at the post office. Plain clothes, no badge visible. Titan waited in the back seat of the unmarked car, nose pressed to the window. Inside the P.O. box was a brown envelope. No return address. Back in his car, Keller tore it open. Inside were two S. A folded map of central Ohio with a red X over a warehouse near an AV, abandoned trucking route, a disposable flip phone, and a printed note. They're moved in stages, hidden in plain sight. Watch the trucks that don't carry food. Keller didn't waste time. He drove straight to the warehouse, an old, freighting hub, now boarded up and listed as inactive. The chain on the gate was cut, rusted through. He parked a mile away and walked the rest. From a distance, the place looked dead. But as he circled the lot, he noticed fresh tire tracks in the gravel. 3 semis, no markings, no license plates visible from his angle. Then he heard it, a soft banging sound. He crouched near the south-facing wall, a half-shuttered window, let in dim light. Keller peeked inside. A figure was pacing, a man, late 42nds, wearing blue coveralls and gloves. He was talking into a phone, nodding behind him, stacked boxes labeled as kitchen, supply. But Keller had seen enough false labeling in his career. He called it in. The raid happened 6 hours later. Homeland Security, state police, and 2 trafficking task force agents swarmed the warehouse under cover of night. Keller stood back with Titan, watching as they moved in like shadows, silent and precise. 5 minutes later, one agent shouted, "We found something!" Keller rushed in. They uncovered a hidden cargo compartment built into the flooring of a refrigerated semi-truck. It had been soundproofed and lined with foam panels. Inside were bedding rolls, juice boxes, and a bucket. No children, but there was evidence of recent occupation. A half-eaten granola bar, child-sized sneakers, and a worn pink teddy bear. And on the back of the bear was a name. Tag, Lily. "This is real," Keller whispered. Titan sat beside him, ears twitching, eyes locked on the truck. The agent beside him nodded grimly. "They're moving them like freight." Back at HQ, Keller updated the incident file and added Lily's name to a growing list of possible trafficking victims. But he didn't sleep that night. Neither did Titan, because there was one more message waiting for him when he checked the flip phone left in the envelope. A single video file. It showed Lily sitting in a dim room, small bare concrete floor, talking to someone off camera. She said, "We're going on a trip, but she made us promise not to cry or we won't get to see the sky anymore." Keller's heart dropped. The video timestamp was from 36 hours ago. They were still moving, and if the clock was right, they only had a day or two before the girls were gone for good. He called the FBI task force commander and demanded full jurisdiction access. The commander hesitated until Keller played him the clip. "Get your K9, the agent said. "You've got 48 hours. Use them." The next morning, Keller suited up. No uniform, no press, just him, his badge, his vest, and Titan. They returned to Maple Glen one last time, not to talk, to shut it down. He and the FBI agents arrived just before breakfast hours. Staff were caught off guard. Nancy Whitmore tried to block the door, but was escorted outside in handcuffs before she could finish her sentence. Keller and Titan pushed through the orphanage halls, sweeping each room. Titan paused outside a supply closet, one that had been padlocked the week prior. Keller broke the lock with a crowbar. Inside was a metal door cold to the touch. Titan growled, his nose pressed to the base. Keller looked to the agent beside him. "Get ready," he said. The metal door was colder than it had any right to. Was be Officer Ryan Keller pressed his hand against the steel slab, the chill creeping through his gloves as Titan growled low beside him. The air smelled stale, faintly metallic, with a trace of something else: plastic, rubber, and fear. Behind him, 2 FBI agents stood, ready, one with a battering ram, the other scanning the perimeter of the orphanage hallway. The rest of the building had been cleared. Children were safe and accounted for, but 5 names were still missing. 5 girls, supposedly transferred, yet with no paperwork, no transportation logs, and no contact from the alleged receiving facility. They all knew it now. Maple Glen wasn't just an orphanage, it was a front. And Titan, as always, had found the key. "You're up," Keller said, stepping back. The agent swung the ram. Hard. Boom. The first hit shook at the door, but didn't budge again. Boom. On. The third strike. The hinges gave way with a metallic screech. The door swung open with a gust of cold air that hit them like a punch to the chest. Keller swept his flashlight inside, Titan rushing ahead. What they found wasn't a native room. It was a tunnel. The walls were made of poured concrete, curved slightly, like a storm drain. The floor sloped downward and twisted out of view. On the walls were yellow arrows crudely painted, pointing forward. "Who builds a tunnel under a licensed orphanage?" one of the agents muttered. Keller didn't answer. He just followed Titan, heart pounding, gun drawn. The deeper they moved, the colder it became. The tunnel was deathly quiet. No water, no wind, no pipes humming, just their footsteps, and Titan's steady breathing. About 60 yards in, the path opened into a square chamber, lit only by one hanging bulb. Titan stopped at the threshold. Keller froze behind him. In the center of the room sat a wooden chair bolted to the floor. On it was a stuffed animal, a faded unicorn missing one eye, and next to it, a Polaroid photo held in place with medical tape. Keller stepped forward, took the photo, and turned it toward the light. 5 little girls standing shoulder to shoulder, pale, stiff, afraid. Lily was in the center, and behind them was this very room. They had been here. Keller's stomach dropped. He looked around. There were shackles on the wall, a portable heater, a single blue duffel bag zipped shut. No beds, no blankets, just that chair. He opened the bag. Inside, protein bars, water, bottles, sleeping pills. This wasn't a holding room. It was a staging area. "Clear," one of the agents called from behind. "Room's empty, but we'll log it." Keller crouched beside Titan and whispered, "What do you smell, boy?" Titan sniffed the air, then the floor. His tail twitched. He turned sharply and began barking at a steel panel on the far side of the chamber. Another door. This one wasn't locked. Inside was a set of stairs leading up. They emerged into the basement of a neighboring building, a disused recreation center that shared the same property line as Maple Glen. Keller looked around, heart racing. Everything in this basement was dusty, neglected, but on the far wall was a whiteboard with names and numbers. Underneath it, a calendar with 5 red circles. The last one was today. "Today's the transfer date," he said out loud. One of the agents pointed at a storage locker against the wall. "You're going to want to see this." Keller opened it. Inside were 5 child-size hooded sweatshirts, each labeled with a different city: Chicago, Atlanta, Denver, Charlotte, and Houston. Underneath them were backpacks pre-packed with snacks, baby wipes, and one prepaid flip phone in each. They were planning to disperse the girls across the country. "We're looking at a multi-state trafficking op," one agent said grimly. "And it's mobile." Keller's phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered. A familiar voice came through, hushed but urgent. "Grace Manning, you need to move. Now." They're loading the girls onto a truck behind the old Ridgemont ice plant. They're using construction vans to blend in. "Where are you? I can't be seen. Just trust me. Go now." Then the line went dead. The Ridgemont ice plant had been closed for 5 years, sitting at the edge of town like a ghost. It was a known site for squatters and teens looking to spray paint. Nobody ever looked at it twice. Now it was the final transfer point. Keller radioed to head to the FBI lead. "We've got the drop site, Ridgemont ice plant. Moving now with K9. Copy that. Teams en route. Do not engage until we arrive." Keller didn't wait. He and Titan arrived 9 minutes later. Headlights off, tires crunching slowly across the cracked asphalt lot. It was nearly sunset, casting long shadows over the overgrown fence and collapsed roof. Titan sat alert in the passenger seat, ears forward, nose twitching. They parked a block away and went in on foot, Keller with his vest, zipped and weapon, holstered but ready. As they approached the building, Titan let out a short clipped bark. Movement. Keller ducked, low, and peered through a broken panel in the siding. Inside was chaos. 2 men in construction gear loading crates into the back of a white delivery truck. Another man stood guard near the exit, smoking a cigarette. Then Keller saw it, a little hand gripping the edge of one crate. Lily. He didn't wait. "Police, don't move!" he shouted, charging through the side door with Titan at his heels. One of the men bolted immediately, but Titan launched like a rocket, tackling him to the ground in seconds. The others froze as Keller swept the room. "Hands now. Get on the ground." The man near the crate raised his hands, pale with shock. Inside the wooden box, not even secured, were 3 little girls, their faces dirty, their eyes wide with terror. 2 more crates waited by the door. Keller pried open this next one. Lily was inside, curled up, trembling, her arms around a younger girl who was crying silently. "It's okay," Keller whispered. "You're safe now." By the time the task force arrived, all 5 girls had been rescued. Paramedics checked them over. They were weak, hungry, frightened, but alive. The men were arrested on sight. The truck was seized, and Titan, never left Lily's side. She held on to his fur like it was the only solid thing in the world. Keller sat on the curb, watching as the scene played out under the pink-gold sky of early evening. He should have felt relieved, but his guts still churned. This wasn't the end. This was just one node in a larger network. And somewhere out there were more. Crates, more tunnels, more doors, waiting to be opened. As they loaded the girls into an ambulance, Keller crouched beside Lily. She looked up at him, her eyes hollow but full of fight. "Is Titan going to stay with me?" she asked. Keller smiled softly. "He'll be nearby. He always finds who needs him most." She looked at the dog and nodded. "I knew. He'd come back." The Ridgemont rescue was supposed to be the end of it. 5 terrified girls pulled from the backs of the wooden crates. 2 traffickers in custody, and Titan, still by Lily's side, greeted as a hero. For a brief moment, everything felt like justice had finally done its job, but nothing ever stays clean for long. By the next morning, 3 of the rescued girls had vanished from the hospital. No broken windows, no forced doors, just gone. Detective Aaron Walsh met Officer Ryan Keller at the hospital just after 6 a.m. Her expression somewhere between fury and disbelief. "You're telling me someone walked 3 children out of a secure pediatric wing?" she snapped. "I don't know," Keller said, jaw clenched. "I left Titan here last night. He was asleep, next to Lily. He never made a sound." Walsh glanced at the German shepherd sitting calmly by the nurse's station. Titan's eyes were alert, but his body language was unsettled. He knew something was wrong. "Did Lily see anything?" Walsh asked. Keller nodded. "She's awake, still shaken up." It said, "Someone in a nurse's uniform came in and told her the others were getting their special transfer papers." Walsh scoffed. "There were no transfer orders." "I know. Security footage already pulled. The cameras glitched for exactly 13 minutes. Right around 3:14 a.m. "Inside job," Walsh muttered. Keller looked toward Lily's room, his gut churning again. "They weren't just cleaning up," he said. "They were silencing witnesses." Inside the room, Lily sat cross-legged on the hospital bed, one arm in a sling, the other stroking Titan's fur. She didn't cry. Not anymore. But the way her small fingers gripped the dog's neck said everything. "Lily," Keller said gently, "do you remember anything about the person who came in last night?" She hesitated, then nodded. "It wasn't a nurse. Did you recognize them?" Her eyes flickered. She leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. "He was one of the people from the crates, the one who fed us. Before you came," Keller's blood ran cold. "They let him in here," Walsh said behind him, stunned. "No," Keller muttered. "He got in here." Lily tugged Keller's sleeve. "He told me he'd be back for me too." By mid-morning, the hospital was on full lockdown. Media swarming the parking lot, and parents of other pediatric patients demanding answers. Meanwhile, Titan led Keller and Walsh out behind the hospital loading dock to a dumpster that reeked of antiseptic and latex. Keller lifted the lid and grimaced. Inside were 3 shredded hospital gowns, each still tagged with a girl's name. "They never made it to another wing," he said. "They were taken straight out in disguise." Walsh stared at the industrial laundry truck idling at the far end of the parking lot. "Let's pull every laundry route from the last 6 hours," she said. "Find out where the hell they went." Back at the station, a task divorce was already working around the clock. FBI. Techs were trying to unmask the glitch in the hospital's security system. Nothing pointed to a simple power failure. It had been hacked, likely using internal access. An informant had reported similar disappearances from 2 other facilities over the past year. Both licensed children's homes, both clean on the surface, but both had one thing in common: a shell company called Core Star Logistics, which supposedly donated transportation services to vulnerable shelters nationwide. They also owned a small private Airstrip 30, east of Columbus. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Walsh asked. "Yeah," Keller said. "They're getting ready to fly them out. Gone for good." By noon, they had a warrant and a team assembled. Walsh, Keller, Titan, and 6 federal agents rolled out toward the airrip. The van was quiet, tension suffocating. Keller kept his hand resting on Titan's back the whole ride. "You sure your dog can track them after this long?" one of the agents asked. Keller just nodded. "He's not just a tracker. He remembers fear." The Airstrip looked abandoned. From a distance, one rusted hangar, 2 small aircraft on the tarmac, no staff in sight. But Titan's ears perked up before they even got out of the vehicle. He barked once, sharp and focused. "They're here," Keller said. The team split into 2 groups and moved in. Inside the hangar, it smelled like jet fuel, sweat, and something sour. Behind stacks of cargo crates, Titan began barking again, this time frantically, digging at a false wall that had been constructed out of wooden pallets and plastic sheeting. Walsh yanked the partition back and gasped. Inside was a makeshift waiting room, plastic folding chairs, 2 coolers with juice boxes, and a whiteboard that read, "Transfer 2 p.m. 3 girls B-flight. Where are they now?" Keller shouted. An agent pointed toward the open jet across the tarmac. "There's movement in the cabin." "Go!" Walsh barked. They sprinted toward the plane, guns raised. At the top of the stairs, a man in a business suit stepped out, hands raised. "I'm just a pilot. I was told it was a charter for executives." "Step away from the controls," one agent shouted. Keller pushed past him into the cabin. There, seated in the last row, were the 3 girls. Drugged, dazed, but alive. He called for medics and carefully guided them off the plane, Titans circling protectively around them. Walsh cuffed the pilot even as he sputtered protests. "Let's see your charter logs," she said. "You're not flying anyone today." Back at HQ, Keller and Walsh watched surveillance footage from the Airstrip storage facility, which had recorded a vehicle pulling in an hour before they arrived. It was the same laundry truck from the hospital. The driver, a man using a fake ID, but facial recognition confirmed it. He wasn't just one of the traffickers. He was a licensed foster parent. Later that night, after processing reports, Keller sat on the precinct bench with Titan beside him. The station was quiet now. The adrenaline had worn off. "You think we got them all?" he asked aloud. Titan didn't answer, but the way his eyes still searched, the hallway said enough. No, it wasn't over. Walsh came over with coffee in one hand and a case file in the other. "Grace Manning just sent another tip," she said. Keller looked up. "What is it?" she says. "This ring doesn't just operate here," says Maple. Glenn was one of 12 facilities. Keller took the file. The title read, "Sparrow Network Domestic Pipeline Routes." Suspected. He stood up slowly. "Get the team ready. We're not done." That night, Keller took Titan to the foster home, where Lily was now being temporarily placed with a trauma-trid caregiver. When the door opened, Lily came running into the yard. Titan barked happily and bounded toward her. She hugged him. "Tite, you found them?" she whispered. "Yeah," Keller said, kneeling beside her. "But we're going to find the rest too." "Promise?" He met her eyes. "I promise." The air inside the precinct was thick with tension. Officer Ryan Keller stared at the corkboard in front of him. Lines of red yarn connecting names, addresses, license plates, and facility codes. The more they uncovered, the more it felt like they were digging through the roots of a tree that went much deeper than they ever imagined. 12 facilities, all supposedly licensed, all linked through obscure nonprofit names, shady shell companies, and one central piece, Core Star Logistics. That name kept showing up on delivery receipts, vehicle logs, even the labels on crates that once held children. But it wasn't just about moving cargo. Core Star didn't own property. It moved lives between people who paid to stay invisible. And now, Grace Manning, his anonymous whistleblower, had dropped another breadcrumb. Her message was simple. He's still out there. The man in the blue van, you've seen him already. You just didn't realize. Keller didn't need more than that. He pulled surveillance footage from the day they first arrived at Maple Glen. There, parked across the street, barely noticeable, was a dusty blue panel van. No logos, no plates. It was there the next day too, and the day after that, always nearby, always idle, but never noticed. Keller's stomach turned. Pull every traffic cam feed in a 10 miles radius, he told the tech team. I want every angle that van shows up. Entry, exit, stops, everything. It took hours, but then they found it. Footage from a highway ramp on the outskirts of Franklin County showed the van merging behind a CoreStar semi. For a brief moment, sunlight hit the windshield just right, and the driver's face became visible. Keller paused the feed and leaned in. It wasn't just any driver. It was the same man Lily had described at the hospital, the one who fed them before the crates, the one who promised he'd be back, and Keller had seen him. Before, too. He worked maintenance at Maple Glen. Detective Erin Walsh pushed through the precinct doors with a manila folder in hand. She dropped it on Keller's desk. We got a name. Brent. Coburn, age 49, former trucker, 5 fake identities. Last real address was in Westerville, but he's been off-grid for 6 years. He's our guy. He's more than that, Walsh said. He's a recruiter. He doesn't just move the kids, he prepares them. Keller's fists clenched. Then we're going to find him fast. They started canvassing industrial yards, abandoned storage units, even farm silos in the region. Brent was known for using rural buildings, easy to hide, hard to trace, but every lead came up cold. That's when Titan made the difference. Keller had held on to Lily's old stuffed bear, the one found in the cargo crate, and let Titan sniff it during a routine sweep of the latest potential site, a decommissioned dairy plant 45 minutes north of Columbus. As soon as they got close, Titan jumped from the cruiser window and sprinted across the field. He barked, sharp, and urgent. Keller knew the sound. They had something. The dairy plant looked dead. No electricity, windows cracked, ivy curling through old loading bays. But behind the main silo was a trailer, beige, boxy, with a tarp, pulled over the license plate. Titan barked at the front door and scratched like he was trying to dig his way in. Brent, Keller muttered. He drew his weapon and waited for backup. Within minutes, 4 agents flanked the trailer. Police, step out with your hands up. Silence, then a sudden sound. An engine starting. From behind the bood, silo, the blue van roared to life and peeled out in a spray of gravel. He's running. Keller didn't hesitate. He leapt back into the cruiser with Titan and took off after the van. The chase cut across farmland, winding roads, and a stretch of open highway. Brent was fast, reckless, blowing through intersections and weaving between cars, like he had nothing left to lose. But Titan never looked away. He tracked the movement, barking louder each time they gained ground. Finally, Brent made a critical mistake. He swerved onto a dirt road leading into a dead-end construction zone. Keller slammed the brakes sideways, blocking the exit. Out of the van now. Brent kicked the door open and bolted on foot, but he didn't get far. Titan shot forward, hitting him, center mass, and bringing him down hard into the gravel. The man screamed, flailing, but Keller was already on him, cuffed, bleeding, cornered, and suddenly laughing. You think I'm the worst one? Brent spat. I'm nothing. I'm just a courier. You think this ends with me? Keller leaned in. No, but it starts. With you. Back at the station, Brent refused to talk for hours. But when he saw Titan again, sitting calmly across the interview room watching him, his face twitched. You know, Brent muttered, that dog cost us a lot of money. You, don't forget a nose like that. Keller stood still, arms crossed. Where are the other girls? Brent scoffed. Which ones? Keller walked over, placed Lily's bear on the table. Brent looked away. Walsh stepped in with a file. We traced a burner phone you used last week. You made 2 calls from a gas station in Gallipolis, less than 10 minutes from a private lake house registered to a holding company connected to CoreStar. Want to take a guess what we'll find? When we opened the basement? Brent blinked but said nothing, so they went anyway. The lake house sat behind a row of trees, on a quiet road. Nice on the outside, normal. It could have belonged to any family, but the inside told a different story. Plastic sheeting covered the floors, locks on the outside of the bedroom doors, cameras, small, cheap ones, tucked into fake smoke detectors. And in the basement, a door with a keypad lock. Titan barked the moment they stepped inside. Keller typed in a guess. Brent's birthday. Click. The door swung open. Inside were two girls, huddled together on a mattress, pale but alive. One was no more than 5. The other clutched a coloring book. When they saw Titan, they didn't scream. They smiled. By that night, Brent Coburn had been charged with conspiracy, trafficking, kidnapping, and unlawful imprisonment. But he still wouldn't talk about the network's core. Who gave the orders? Who signed the fake transfers? Who ran CoreStar from the top? But Grace Manning wasn't done helping. She sent a final message. Look at the donors behind CoreStar. The biggest names hide in plain sight. Keller looked at the list and nearly choked. One name stood out. Judge Raymond Sloan, family court, active in all 12 counties. Tell me that's not the same Sloan who signs emergency guardianship orders, Walsh said, flipping through documents. It is, Keller said, voice flat. Sloan had been quietly approving transfers for children, at risk of abuse, often without parental contact, often pushing them through specific facilities tied to CoreStar. They weren't just moving orphans, they were creating them. That night, Keller drove to Lily's foster home again. She came outside, pajama-clad, hair still damp from a bath. Titan rushed to her, tail wagging. Did you find more? She asked. Keller knelt down beside her. We did. Are they safe now? Yeah, they are. She hugged Titan again, and for the first time, Keller saw her eyes soften just a little. You're going to stop all of them, right? She whispered. Keller met her gaze. We're going to try. The rain came hard that night. Thick sheets pounded the asphalt outside the Columbus precinct, drumming like war beats on the glass windows. Inside, the mood was no different. The air hung heavy, the kind of quiet you only hear when everyone in the room realizes they're standing at the edge of something huge. Officer Ryan Keller stared at the name on the screen in front of him. Judge Raymond Sloan. The man had presided over hundreds of custody cases. His signature had finalized adoptions, terminated parental rights, and more importantly, granted emergency removals from homes without so much as a court hearing. Now, that same signature was tied to 10 of the 12 facilities linked to CoreStar. Tell me I'm wrong, Keller said, eyes not leaving the screen. Detective Aaron Walsh sighed, tossing another file onto the table. You're not wrong. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Walsh said, You know, we can't just roll up to a sitting judge's home without real cause. We have cause, not enough to stick. Slow's careful. He didn't make those transfers illegal. He just made them fast and untraceable, Keller muttered. He buried kids in paperwork, then handed them off like packages. Walsh leaned forward. So, how do we get him? Keller paused. Then his eyes lit up. We don't go after the judge. Walsh raised a brow. Then who? Keller pointed at the screen. The notary. Every court's signature required a notary stamp. The same notary had processed 8 of the emergency transfer orders. Lucinda Arburn, age 64, retired court clerk turned private notary. She lived alone in Gahanna in a modest ranch house with wind chimes on the porch and garden gnomes guarding the walkway. Keller and Walsh showed up the next morning, plain. Clothes, federal badge tucked inside the coat. Lucinda answered the door wearing a Cleveland Browns hoodie and holding a steaming mug of tea. Can I help you? We're looking into a set of transfers you notarized over the past 2 years, Keller said gently. She blinked. Transfers? Children? Foster placements? Lucinda's hands trembled, slightly. She stepped aside without a word. Inside, they sat in a living room filled with bird figurines and crocheted blankets. A clock ticked steadily behind them. I don't know what I signed, Lucinda said finally. They came from the judge's clerk, sealed, always urgent, always a deadline. I was told they were emergency removals for kids in danger. Did you ever see the kids? Lucinda shook her head. Never, just the papers. Keller leaned forward. Can you show us the originals? She nodded and disappeared down the hallway. When she returned, she held a shoebox, full of yellowed manila folders. Keller opened the top one. His blood ran cold. Lily's name was on it. The papers inside were pristine, but the signatures, they were off. Lucinda peered over his shoulder. That's not my seal. Walsh flipped another page. None of them were. They were fakes, exact forgeries using Lucinda's ID number. "You're being framed," Keller said. Lucinda stared blankly. "Why?" Walsh answered. "Because if the whole system's rotten, they need someone to blame when it collapses." Lucinda's hands started to shake. "I notarized hundreds of documents. If even half of them are fake," Keller stood. "We're going to protect you, but we need your help." Lucinda hesitated, then nodded slowly. Back at HQ, Lucinda was placed under federal protection. Her testimony alone wouldn't be enough to take down Judge Sloan, but it was a start, a crack. But they needed something bigger, something undeniable. 3 days later, Grace Manning delivered it. Keller had almost given up hope of hearing from her again. But then, a secure flash drive arrived at the precinct with no note, just a label. "He took the others, but I kept him." The video on the drive was disturbing. Grainy footage timestamped 6 weeks ago. Inside a small, windowless room, Sloan stood with his back to the camera, speaking to a boy, maybe 7 years old, who sat tied to a chair. Sloan's voice was low, but clear enough. "We don't hurt you, we just relocate." "The others already went," the boy whispered, something the camera couldn't catch. And then Sloan said the words that made everyone in the room fall silent. "He took the others, but I kept him." The room in the video matched the basement of a farmhouse seized in the Core raids. The boy in the chair, his name was Alio Parker, reported missing from a group home in Cincinnati. He'd been off the grid for almost 2 months. Now they knew why. A multi-agency warrant was drafted in less than 24 hours. But by the time they arrived at Sloan's mansion in Upper Arlington, he was gone. Doors wide open, office emptied, computers wiped, gone. Walsh stared at the empty study and swore under her breath. He ran. Keller nodded grimly. Someone tipped him. Titan sniffed through the house, eventually scratching at a hidden cabinet beneath the desk. Inside, they found one thing left behind: a printed ledger. Dozens of names, dates, locations, amounts, and routing numbers. "You're kidding me," Walsh said. "It's a payment list," Keller whispered. "Each name's a kid." The FBI froze every account linked to the routing numbers. Within 12 hours, 3 more facilities shut their doors. 2 staff members had disappeared. One was caught at the Canadian border, but Sloan's still missing. Days later, Keller sat at the station, flipping through files, when Titan suddenly barked from across the room. The dog stood rigid, staring at a new bulletin board hung on the far wall. Recent fugitives at the top. A sketch of Sloan, eyes cold, hair swept back, jaw tight. Keller walked over and stared back. "We're coming," he whispered. That night, as a thunderstorm rolled over the city, Keller returned to Lily's foster home. She was coloring at the kitchen table, crayons scattered everywhere. "Hey," she said with a smile, "you found more people, didn't you?" Keller smiled back. "We did." She stood and walked over, slipping her hand into Titan's fur. "Did you find the man with the glasses?" "Not yet," Keller admitted. "But you're close." "Yeah, real close," Lily nodded solemnly. "Tell Titan when you find him." Keller knelt. "Why, Titan?" "Because he doesn't lie." Back at the precinct, the rain still poured outside. But inside the war room, the map of the country now had 27 pins across 15 states, each one a child saved. But there were more, and Judge Sloan was still out there planning the next move. The sun was just beginning to rise over Columbus when Officer Ryan Keller poured his 3rd cup of black coffee. The precinct was quiet, too quiet. No phones ringing, no chatter from patrol, just a low hum of fluorescent lights and the distant tap-tap of fingers on keyboards. In front of him sat the updated task force board. Photos of children, some smiling, some blurry from security cams, lined the top row. Below them, a growing web of names and locations. Corstar Logistics, Maple Glen Orphanage, Brent, Cobburn, and at the center of it all, Judge Raymond Sloan. Still missing, still a ghost, but the walls were closing in. Over the past 10 days, arrests had surged across 3 states. Former caseworkers, fake foster parents, and shell company executives were finally being booked, cuffed, and dragged into daylight. Each arrest brought answers. Each answer brought more names, and every new name came with a child's face attached. Most had been rescued, some had not. Keller didn't let himself think about the ones they were too late to save. Not now. Not while the fight was still going. At 7:12 a.m., Detective Aaron Walsh burst through the precinct doors, rain still dripping from her coat. "We got him," Keller stood so. Fast his coffee sloshed. Sloan. Yep, she said, breathless. Picked up in a motel just outside Bowling Green. Traveling under a fake name, Frank Cerno. TSA flagged him when he tried to book a charter out of Toledo. We've got him in custody. Keller didn't smile. He didn't even exhale. He just said, let's go. By noon, they were standing outside U.S. Federal Holding on the west end of town. Inside, Raymond Sloan sat in an orange jumpsuit, hands folded like a preacher, awaiting Sunday service. Keller and Walsh entered the interview room. Sloan looked up, calm as ever. You've been busy, he said smoothly. So have you, Walsh replied, dropping a thick folder of charges on the table. Sloan didn't flinch. Keller took a step forward. You signed away the lives of innocent children. I followed the law, Sloan replied. You twisted it. I expedited protection orders. You sold them like inventory. Silence. Keller opened the folder to one photo in particular. Lily sitting in a hospital bed, tightened at her side. You remember her? Sloan's jaw tightened. She's 7, Keller continued. You sent her to a facility that doesn't exist. You signed off on her transfer with fake notary seals. That's not protection. That's trafficking. Sloan's eyes flickered. I had reasons you couldn't possibly understand. Try us, Walsh snapped. Sloan leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. The system was broken. Kids bouncing between homes, getting lost, forgotten. I created something efficient, structured. Everyone involved got what they needed. What about the kids? Keller asked. Sloan shrugged. They were safe. Some had argued the children were given better lives, more chances. But Keller's voice cut through, sharp and unshakable. No, he said, his jaw tight. They weren't saved. They were stolen. Sloan faltered, eyes down. Walsh's words followed like a hammer. You thought you were fixing the system, but you became the monster hiding inside it. The next morning, headlines ignited across the nation. Family court judge arrested in child trafficking scandal. Operation Sparrow unmasks national foster care fraud. Titan's name filled the news feed, praised as the K9 who uncovered the hidden orphanage ring. The ripples spread. Resignations piled up. More judges fell under investigation. CoreStar Logistics collapsed overnight, assets frozen, warehouses seized. For the public, it was victory. For Keller, it was something quieter. A week later, he stood by Lily's school fence, watching the girl who once shook with nightmares now sprint freely across the playground in a pink jacket. She laughed bright, real, unguarded. Titan wagged from the cruiser, barking at her joy. Lily ran to the fence, handing Keller a crayon drawing. Titan inside a red heart. 5 girls holding hands within it. She says she's not afraid of the dark anymore, her foster mom whispered. Keller swallowed hard, scratching Titan's ear. Neither am I, he murmured. That weekend, the precinct celebrated. Pizza, cheap soda, laughter echoing off thin walls. Titan was the star medal on his chest, belly rubs in endless supply. Walsh nudged Keller's shoulder with a grin. You know you're on track for K9 Officer of the Year? Keller chuckled. I'm just keeping up with Titan. But when Walsh asked if he'd ever thought of taking a break, he shook his head. Not while there's still more out there. Later that night, under a sky finally cleared of storm clouds, Keller walked Titan through his quiet street. Stars burned like 1,000 tiny promises. He scrolled through Grace Manning's last message. Thank you for listening, for not looking away. His reply was simple. We're not done. Not yet. Tips kept flowing. Survivors found their voices. Parents long ignored, finally got heard. The system wasn't healed, but the cracks were visible now, and in those cracks, truth began to grow. Titan became a legend. School assemblies, murals, letters from children who called him their hero. But to Keller, Titan was more than that. He was his compass, his anchor. Then, one rain-soaked morning, the radio hissed alive. New lead, farmhouse outside Dayton, another possible facility. Keller glanced at Titan, the dog's ears sharpened, eyes burning with instinct. You ready, partner? Titan barked once sharp, decisive. Keller smiled, shifted the cruiser into gear. The storm ahead waited. But just as the wipers swept across the windshield, a new notification blinked on Keller's phone. Unknown sender. No subject. Just 3 words. It's not over. And in the reflection of the darkened glass, Keller could have sworn he saw Titan's eyes glowing back not just with loyalty, but with warning. They drove on into the rain, chasing the next shadow.